You're being pursued by someone who intends to do you harm. You came to that conclusion when he made a car violently veer off of the road and near crush you against a wall. Certainly, the driver of the car probably thought it was some kind of brake failure, but you could smell the magic in the air, you could taste it, and of course you could see the incantifier on the other side of the street looking directly at you with a smile as you were nearly crushed into the brickwork. Before the driver could even get out to apologise, you were sprinting, you were running away, you could feel the strength of this magic. You wanted no part of it, and so you were sprinting down the road, you were diving into the alleys, you were trying to get away from him in the labyrinthine back streets of this city, and you thought you'd made it. Well, you're glad you didn't attend the order meeting earlier today, otherwise you might have been dressed in a dress and high heels, and that wouldn't have made running particularly easy, but you think you've got away from him, until you turn into this lane, and you see at the other end of it your pursuer still there, still smiling, not warm and welcoming, but the smile a hunter might have when he spots his prey. You hear the pop, pop, pop of a chain-link fence removing itself from the pole that keeps it erect as it snakes around you, trying to constrict you, trying to squeeze the life out of you. You're glad, to whatever gods there may exist, if any exist, that you do not need your hands to create this rote that you know so well. Time and space. 10 seconds back. You don't travel 10 seconds backwards in time, you travel to where you were 10 seconds ago. And so you shift from where you are back to where you were. The chain link fence collapses, the snake, devoid of animation now. You don't stop to think, you run. You run straight up the wall of the building beside you. You don't care that this magic is now vulgar, it's now improvised, you need to get away. You're not an offensive mage, you're not an aggressive spellcaster. This is why you hang around in a cabal. You leave the aggression to the members of the Adamantine Arrow, of which you are not one. But you sprint. You leap from windowsill to windowsill. You run across the brickwork, horizontal to the wall. You don't care, you're just trying to get away from this guy, and quite honest, if someone sees you, you can only hope that they rationalise it as parkour or some other street dance art that you've seen before, not magic, because God, you really do not need a paradox right now. You look over your shoulder. He's still there. He smiles more broadly. He knew that you would hesitate, he knew that you would look over your shoulder, because at that very moment a window flies from its frame right in front of you, and you smash straight into it. You lose your concentration, you lose your footing, and you start to plummet down, down, and you close your eyes and you think to yourself, focus, 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 and you do not hit the ground. Welcome to the Gentleman's Guide to Gaming, and my review of Mage the Awakening. Now, Mage the Awakening, that's a game I haven't reviewed yet, and it's a game that has been out for nearly 10 years, so what has taken me so long with it? Well, there's a couple of things. As you know, the rules of my show are that I don't review games that I don't like. I don't review games that I don't think are put together well. I don't review games that I don't get. Now, I'll exempt the first two from that list, but I didn't get Mage the Awakening the first time I played it. Certainly I didn't own it as well, which didn't help. But I felt that Mage the Awakening was impenetrable. I just couldn't access it at all. I had no imagination for Mage the Awakening, which was sad, because the game itself was very well put together. It was very well written. It had a fantastic universe behind it, and the options that are available to players were immense, and I think that's part of what daunted me. The world was so expansive, Mage the Awakening had so many options, I felt like a prisoner. I just didn't know which one to pick. Well, now Mage the Awakening is getting a reboot, and that is through the Fallen World Chronicle, which is to Mage the Awakening what God Machine Chronicle was to the World of Darkness. Dave Brookshaw is developing it for the Onyx Path, and I recommend visiting theonyxpath.com in order to keep up with his open development blogs on the subject of the Fallen World Chronicle, which aims to tighten up Mage the Awakening, improve the rules, improve the setting, give more focus to the game, and I don't think that can be a bad thing. Now, that doesn't mean I'm about to review a game that I thought was bad. Not at all. I intend to whet your appetites for the Fallen World Chronicle, because on rereading, on rerunning Mage the Awakening, it turns out that it's actually a very good game, and my palate may well have been refined since the first time that I dabbled in it. I think my horizons have broadened somewhat. Now, Bill Bridges of Werewolf the Apocalypse fame was the first person to develop Mage the Awakening. He did it when it was the third release for the New World of Darkness. And back then, I did feel like the game lacked a horror element. I think that was my biggest problem with it. Vampire, werewolf, Promethean, horror was very much on the nose. There's a monster, you're playing it, be lucky. Well, in Mage, what's so scary about playing a spellcaster, a witch, a wizard, a warlock? Is there something scary about it? Power corrupts, yes, but that's not the kind of thing that's going to give me nightmares. Well, I think now what I find scary about Mage is the existential horror. Which, alright, some people say, well, that's a bit highbrow, or, existential horror. Oh, please. But it's something that also exists in Mummy the Curse, and I do see similarities between Mage and Mummy, and games like Eclipse Phase, for that matter, transhumanism games. I find these games where you are a prisoner. In this game, you're a prisoner in the Fallen World. The Fallen World being our version of Earth. You can access the Supernal World, you can pull things from it, you can pull your power from it, you know that there is a world behind this world, but you also know that everything surrounding you is a lie. You know that everything alive is made up of symbols, shapes, shadows, energies, pulses, and that everyone is sleeping. No one is aware that the reality they're experiencing is in fact a lie, except you and other mages. You know that you can manipulate reality because this isn't reality. You can pull reality into the fallen world. So whilst you have power, you're also trapped here. You can't escape the fallen world. You are just as much a prisoner as all of the sleepers. The only difference is you know about it. And so the media that I take, influence from for Mage the Awakening when running it is The Matrix, the David Cronenberg films, Existence, Naked Lunch, books such as Neverwhere and American Gods by Neil Gaiman. I think that those kinds of mediums where the characters are aware that there's a world behind a world, where it turns out reality isn't exactly what we make of it or what we think of it, can be terrifying. And I think Mage the Awakening can therefore be quite terrifying, but also quite fun to explore, and that is a key element to any game. It has to be fun to some degree, and Mage the Awakening is certainly that. Now, the book itself, as I say, I found it a bit impenetrable when I first read it. Now, that's through no fault of the introduction, which goes into themes, mood, tone, and influences and the like quite happily in its usual lexicon. It wasn't through any fault of the inter-chapter fiction or pre-chapter fiction, because I felt that introduced a newly awakened mage in a very interesting way and gave you ideas for scenes in games in a way that fiction doesn't usually do for me. It was able to actually make me think, okay, I'm going to take this scene and put it in a game, and if fiction can do that in a role-playing game, well, it's really served its purpose, hasn't it? It certainly wasn't the fault of the art by Michael Kaluta, I think it is, who did the tradition art for the first edition of Mage the Ascension as well, because I find his art absolutely fantastic. It really brings home that feel of Mage to me, and I'm glad they had him on board for this. For me, it was Chapter 1. Chapter 1 is huge in the sense that it's expansive. It covers the history of Mage, being that mages started in the city of Atlantis, the Isle of Atlantis, that was formerly the home for dragons, eventually home for enlightened people that were able to harness power from the Supernal World. Eventually the Exarchs decided they wanted to move up to the Supernal World and control the fallen world beneath it, basically manipulate it and reshape it in their image. There was a bit of dissent. The ladder that they crafted in order to climb up to the Supernal World was shattered, their method of egress destroyed. Atlantis sank beneath all the tumult, resulting in the mages that you play in this game being members of the orders that are trying to recapture the lost lore of Atlantis. Certainly there are still some mages that wish to dominate humanity, that wish to reshape the fallen world in their image, but your characters are mystery seekers. Your characters are lore seekers. You are trying to not only craft your own mysteries, but you're also trying to discover the mysteries of the past. Again, I feel there's some connection there between this and Mummy the Curse. Obviously this came first, but that is not a trope, I don't want to say, but it's an objective for characters that I think everyone can get behind, the idea of seeking out lost lore. It brings to mind Indiana Jones, Tomb Raider and the like, and that's never a bad thing in a game. Now, that's all presented, and it's presented in very high concept. It goes into a lot of detail of Atlantis, of the watchtowers, of the rise and the fall of the society. And certainly this utopia, fallen utopia, concept isn't unknown in World of Darkness games, whether it's Rome, Pangaea, Irem. Mage the Awakening has its own in Atlantis. But I found that, combined with the introduction of every order, the introduction of every path, of every arcana, of every arcanum within the arcana, of the antagonists and so on, and the Fallen World and Supernal World, within Chapter 1 was too broad. I found it too expansive. Now, you know, if I was using my head, I should have just picked and chose the bits I wanted to use in my given game, but I wanted to consume it all, and in consuming it all, I became bloated, I suppose, with the amount of information on hand, and felt this game's a bit unwieldy, it's a bit heavy going, and I don't know how I'm going to apply all of this knowledge. Now, the game itself actually came into its own in Chapter 2, which starts introducing your character creation, more stable grounding there. It goes into the mechanical benefits and disadvantages of belonging to certain orders or being in certain paths. So, for instance, I've got one noted down. The results being favoured attributes, skills and arcana, and an inferior arcanum. For instance, if my character were an acanthus, they are very flighty, they are very fey-like mages, of the mysterium, who, as the name might imply, they are knowledge hoarders, scholars and the like, I would have skill speciality whenever I happen to use investigation, occult or survival. For spellcasting, I would gain composure as a favoured resistance against against magic as an attribute, and I'd have time and fate as ruling arcana and forces as an inferior arcanum. Now that sounds complicated, but it's not. 3 tables are all you need. You apply your order, you apply your path, you can work out from those 3 tables what your favoured skills are, what your favoured attribute is, what your favoured arcana are, and what your disfavoured arcanum is. It's as simple as that. Chapter 2 really breaks it down nicely, and I think does a good job of explaining these things. Whereas in Chapter 1, which really throws the orders at you there and then, I think in the incorrect location, Chapter 2 goes into detail on the paths, such as the flightier acanthus, the transformative Moros, and the fanatical Obromos, among there's 5 in total, just as there are 5 orders. And the paths are detailed fantastically. I find them to be the clans, as opposed to the covenants, which make up the orders. And they are more important, I would say, to the player than the order. I would say, in fact, that the orders should be introduced in the game by the storyteller for the players, rather than the players having to pick one at the beginning, because it just adds a layer of complexity that I feel is unnecessary at this point in the game. Also, the character generation introduces new advantages, such as Gnosis. Gnosis affects a number of things in-game, including your ability to cast improvised spells, and the power of the spells that you can cast. On the other hand, the more powerful it gets, the more likely it is you're going to cause a paradox, and the more magically apparent you are. There's also a mana pool. Mana pool is used to cast your improvised spells, and you can use mana to inflict aggravated damage with your spells, that kind of thing. You can replenish your mana through going to various magically powerful sites, domains, and the like, lodestones and that kind of thing. Or through acts such as human sacrifice, if you're prepared to sacrifice your wisdom in turn, which is your morality trait in Mage the Awakening. Now, from Chapter 2 to Chapter 3, you actually have... Chapter 3 is magic, and this is the big chapter. This is the chapter that sold me on Mage the first time, and has resold me on it this time. Because magic isn't presented as a free-for-all. It's actually got 2 options. You have rotes, Then you have improvised spells. This book is filled with rotes. Chapter 3 is huge. Rotes are pre-programmed spells. They are essentially your Vancian magic. They go up in levels. If, for instance, you have 2 points in the Death Arcanum, you can use a 2-point Death Rote. Simple as that. But in order to have it as a rote, have it as a pre-prepared spell in your head, you need to spend experience in advance to actually have that rote known to you. Now, if you want to incorporate that into roleplay, then you could have that rote taught to you by another mage, but you still have to spend the experience in order to know it. Now, even if you don't have it as a rote, you can cast it as an improvised spell, but improvising magic carries its own risks. You can also conjunctify spells. So for instance, if let's say you wanted to make a small fire in front of you, all you'd need is a few points in forces, more likely than anything else. Let's say you wanted to create a fire some distance away. If you had points in space as well as forces, then maybe you could create a fire at distance. Or if you wanted it to be a delayed fire, you would use time and forces. You see what I'm doing? The more points you put in these things, the more way you can combine your magic. And you don't have to go with the magic that's in the book. You can make up your own spells. Obviously it's worthwhile running them via the storyteller, but one of the biggest appeals of this, much as in Ars Magica, is the ability to craft your own magic. Now, the more vulgar your magic, the more likely it is that it's going to cause a paradox, which can do everything from just cause you to take damage to basically creating a black hole through which the abyssal spirits enter. And the fallen world's increasingly being taken over by the abyss, and there's many, many creatures that are, of course, horrific to behold. They partly want to fix the tear, but they also want to exploit it and exploit you. Vulgar magic is truly at its worst when witnessed by sleepers who just can't reconcile it, not unlike the delirium or lunacy that mortals suffer when they actually see a werewolf in full form, full flourish, shall we say. There's covert magic, which is the opposite to vulgar magic. This is all detailed in chapter 3, and it's detailed lovingly. It's a fantastic chapter. It's one that I can actually spend time reading. I do love spells in a role-playing game, and they're presented interestingly. They're presented in a way that makes you feel, okay, well, if I added this to this, I could make this. It's not all there for you, but you can make the sum yourself. Now, you can also go into further detail on that. You can, let's see. Let's say, go back to covert magic. If, for instance, your fire was being set in an already overheating computer mainframe, then no one's going to think twice about it. However, if you just create a fire in a pool of water, that's fairly vulgar. Sensory and sympathetic magic is also covered in chapter 3. Sensory magic being magic cast on something you can see, usually within about 200 yards, or taste, or whatever. Sympathetic magic is more difficult, but can have better effects. So, for instance, if you have someone's hair, or if you have some ground-up brick from a building that you wish to affect with a spell, you can essentially create your little gris-gris or voodoo doll and the like in order to cast a spell on someone. So, for instance, rather than with sensory magic, you can only attach your fire to something you can see. With sympathetic magic, you could arguably set fire to a guy who's a country away, and there are various penalties. The less well you know your target, then the more difficult it's going to be to cast that sympathetic magic. The components you hold, the strength of the components, can result in that sympathetic magic being more powerful. And that spontaneous combustion that you cause out of state may well be vulgar, but you may well be protected from it due to the distance, or of course it could just backlash on you anyway. The magic chapter does blow me away. It's massive, as you might expect, and it does have some faults. The faults are that not every single spell that's detailed in the chapter is detailed fully, but again, I would say that there's supposed to be an element of freedom in this game that allows you to come to conclusions yourself. There's also references to page XX, which are an historic White Wolf issue, But the system surrounding spellcasting is so easy to get your head around after a couple of attempts that, to be honest, it doesn't need codifying too much. It's fairly apparent, at least as far as I'm concerned. Chapter 4 is solid enough. It covers storytelling advice and antagonists in the game, and part of this has already been touched upon in Chapter 1, but it's actually refined here. I find that the storytelling chapter is good for the sense that it gives you various chronicle ideas, and it is actually resplendent with them. But it's also a bit woolly. Many of the chronicle ideas may be used with ease, but it's presented in a somewhat dry fashion. And I understand why the writers didn't want to focus anyone on one particular way of playing. This is the new World of Darkness, after all, it's a toolkit. But again, you could end up with the problem that I ended up with, which is it's too open. Again, I feel that as a more mature role player, I did last play this, I did first play this probably about 8 years ago now, which is some time back. Good lord. That it was too intimidating and too expansive. Now I just read those ideas and I come up with chronicle ideas. I can spool them off, and to the point that I'm intending on running a Chronicle of Mage the Awakening very soon online. The largeness of the storytelling chapter, the sheer number of options available, kind of create the same issue that mages have in the Fallen World. It's immense. You have all this power, but you're trapped as well because you don't know what the hell you can do with it. The antagonists in the chapter, and this is a real highlight of Mage the Awakening, the Seers of the Throne, who are the willing servants of the Exarchs. They still wish to reshape the Fallen World in their image. They still wish to manipulate the Sleepers, if not destroy them. And they are the natural enemies of the mages that you play, or Magi that you play. They emulate your culture, your orders, or perhaps it's the other way round. The Seers of the Throne I can certainly see as sympathetic, or at the very least understandable, because yes, they have all this power. Why the hell shouldn't they be able to use it? You also have Banishers, who work to, prevent people from awakening and keep the Sleepers asleep forever. You have Tremere Liches, that's a name that's probably very familiar to you, and other practitioners of left-handed paths. The antagonists in Mage the Awakening are solid, they are fantastic. They are one of the strengths of the game. In some of the New World of Darkness games, antagonists have been rather compressed. There hasn't been a great deal of options for them. And I think that is a highlight of Blood and Smoke. You've got the Strix, who are presented in many, many forms. And I believe the Isigam Chronicle is doing something very similar for Werewolf the Forsaken when it comes out. Well, Mage the Awakening already has a brilliant rogues gallery, and I think you'd struggle to not pull ideas out from the ideas presented. Beyond the antagonists chapter, you have two appendices. One that covers legacies. Legacies are essentially your bloodlines, your lodges, your focused groups of mages who operate in a slightly different way than their main order dictates. And you have your city setting of Boston, which, in fairness, I think while the legacies are brilliant ideas and are presented in a very digestible way, the city setting is a bit brief, and of course made better by Boston Unveiled, which is a separate book. Does make me wonder why it was presented in the main rulebook, except for the fact that all of the books have these chapters. It just wasn't really good enough for me. And that's pretty much it. That is Mage the Awakening. Now, I do still feel that if you're new to role-playing, Mage the Awakening, as presented in this book, may be a little overwhelming for you. I do, however, feel that if you like a systemed approach with freedom given to players, basically, it's freedom that you can put comfortably within a system. If that makes sense. You can still feel free to do whatever you want, and the rules are there for you to use in order to actually cast off your spells, see whether you can get them off, see whether they work. All the combinations of different arcana can result in some fantastic things, whether it's merely through mixing death and fate, or matter and forces. You know, you can imagine the kinds of things that your character could get up to just through making conjunctions of the spheres, sorry, that's Mage the Ascension term, arcana. I was blown away by the magic in this, and I very much am looking forward to the Fallen World Chronicle and the tightening of this setting. And so that's why I'm looking to run it before the Fallen World Chronicle, just so I can kind of get a before and after feeling. So thank you very much for watching. This review has been a long time coming and much requested. It pretty much caps off the new World of Darkness games for me for review, except for Demon the Descent. So that will have to be the next one, I guess. Oh, and Blood and Smoke, of course. And I thank you very much for watching.